at this year's annual meeting. Appreciate the partnership with ITE and continue to think of California and inviting us to be a part of these discussions. Alyssa, thank you for your leadership at ITE, and thank you to Jeff Pignati as well for all you've done for the transportation community at large and ITE as well. So what I want to share today is a little bit of what's been going on at Caltrans and how we're influencing transportation and quality of life in our state, and also share how I believe it's impacting and changing things around the country as well. I can't think of a more exciting time to be working in this space in our industry, in the transportation industry, whether you're an engineer, a planner, a scientist, whatever you do in this industry. To me, this is one of the most exciting periods because we finally have a convergence of funding and policy that is going beyond just the fact that we need to deliver products or infrastructure items, but we're getting to a point where we're saying, what's the ultimate outcome that we're hoping for? And at Caltrans, I can sum it up in one word: our focus, more than ever, our priority is people. That's the outcome that we are hoping to make a difference with. It's not that the end for us no longer is about delivering a bridge or building a new sidewalk or building a new piece of infrastructure, a trail or whatever it may be. It's what is this going to do? How is this going to help the people we serve? And with that intended end in mind, with that outcome in mind, we believe this department's being transformed, and so is the state along the way. And by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the amazing news that we got yesterday. We continue to head in the right direction on the bipartisan infrastructure framework that was agreed to, that the Senate voted on yesterday, and more than an additional $500 billion potentially for infrastructure. So again, part of that excitement, that genuine excitement that I think a lot of us are experiencing and seeing with this convergence of policy and funding as well. Next slide. So at Caltrans, the changes that are happening are not easy ones, but we are going through a bit of a transformation in the department. Most state DOTs and city DOTs are known for delivering, again, products or pieces of infrastructure, but we're going beyond that and saying, what are the intended outcomes that we're hoping for the people of the state? That's our core responsibility. And we've decided to make our foundational principles at the Department of Transportation these three items: equity, climate action, and safety. And everything we do is being done through this lens. It's being done through making sure we're addressing these issues along the way. And we just don't want to talk about it. I mean, a lot of us have become very good and very polished at being able to talk about these issues over the last year. For us, these are not talking points. These are living points. These are words that we will live by. And that we're putting metrics to hold us accountable, hold ourselves accountable, and let the public hold us accountable on our growth in these areas as well. And I'll talk about these a little bit more through the presentation. Next slide. So when it comes to equity, the first item that was listed there, we've gone beyond coming up with an equity statement. We have an equity statement. Several entities have come up with equity statements lately that sound very good and are saying the right things, but we know our expectations are beyond that. We know how much communities know about some of the things that we've done in the past in missteps, and how we need to right some of those wrongs. So for us, we said, look, it starts with number one. After we go beyond an equity statement, let's come up with a framework. And this is the framework for equity at Caltrans, these 4 Ps. This is what's guiding our work. And these things, all these 4 Ps have metrics associated with them. So number one, our people, believing that whether it's hiring, whether it's promoting, whether it's training, we should be given opportunity to people, regardless of their gender, regardless of their demographic, giving them a true opportunity, regardless of their ability within this department to climb and to excel within the department. So whether it be a woman, Hispanic, African-American, Native American, Asian, doesn't matter, you should have a true opportunity. And there's some things that we're doing to make sure that as we continue to grow and evolve, we're addressing our own people, our own staff. Number two, projects and programs. This is where a lot of state DOTs have seen, have realized how much harmful impact they've had over the last 50 or 60 years in the infrastructure that they've built and created. And we realize that ourselves at Caltrans, and we're saying moving forward, we're going to approach this differently. And it starts with genuinely listening to communities. The communities that we serve, to make sure that all the projects we're doing moving forward, we're not just doing what we want to do at the department, but we're making sure that we're listening to communities to see what they truly need and want as well before we move forward. So that engagement unlike ever before. Building partnerships and working on partnerships in this particular sense, in the equity sense, we have a $1.1 billion small business and DBE budget within the department. I mean, that's you know, you may think that's not a lot, but that's significant. $1.1 billion annually is how much we spend on small businesses and DBEs. And we want to do a better job of making sure that we're truly giving an opportunity to the demographics that have been marginalized in this space, and the ability to be able to do work with us and build a true partnership, a business partnership with them as well. And finally, the Planet P is about the fact that we know there have been disparate impacts when it comes to environmental impacts from some of our transportation decisions. Many of the negative impacts have been in the underserved or marginalized communities. We need to change that. We need to address those planet impacts at Caltrans, and we're committing to do that. Next slide. So we were very fortunate before the pandemic hit in the early spring of 2020. When I got here in 2019, the leadership team, we were able to identify what our 5 priorities were. And so even before we came up with those 3 foundational principles, these 5 things you see here were guiding our work every day within a department. So safety, our overall modality as a state, innovation, efficiencies, and again, partnerships, that's where our focus was. And so when the pandemic hit and we were going through such a tough period, all of us across the country, and Mark on top of that in California, 4 million acres of land burned with the very catastrophic wildfires that hit our state. I mean, there were so many things that we were struggling through as a team and as a group, but we remained very resilient. I think in part because of the fact that we had a sense of our North Star. We had a sense of what direction we were going in, and these 5 priorities that I'll touch on a little bit more were our focus. Next slide. So mention the 5 priorities, mention the foundational, those 3 foundational principles. The key step that I believe we've taken as well is that we've taken those items, those priorities and those foundational principles, and made sure that they're embedded in our guiding documents. So it's just not, you know, talk that's coming from me or some of the leaders within a department, but it's embedded in the key documents that are going to be guiding our work. So for example, our strategic plan, the internal facing document that outlines our mission, values, our goals for the next 5 years. This strategic plan, if you look through it, all the core elements are associated or are derived from those things that I mentioned already. So equity, climate action, safety, for example, modality, multimodalism, those are all key and core parts of the strategic plan. And our long range plan, the 25 to 30 year outlook on how we're going to make investment decisions and policy decisions related to transportation. This document as well, also fully embedded in it are those items. So it's not just priority discussions that come up as talking points, but our guidance, the documents that guide us as an agency, also have these elements embedded in them. Next slide. So when it comes to safety, and I'll talk about go into a little bit this in a little bit more depth. One of the places that we're seeing the most significant, unfortunate downside to what's been happening with safety is what's happening in the pedestrian realm. Not only have we as a nation seen increases in fatality for pedestrians, even through the pandemic, we saw a little bit of an uptick, but we're also seeing that it's disproportionately impacting underserved and minority communities. And if you look at this graphic, it comes from Smart Growth America. You see that through what they call the PDI, Pedestrian Danger Index, these populations walk more, and they're also exposed more to being in fatal crashes. Indian Americans and African Americans, Latinos have a higher rate, as you can see from this graphic, than other demographics in the state. Well, yeah, actually, this is across the country, not only in California. This is the entire United States. But the similar numbers probably appear in your state. For sure, similar numbers appear in the state of California. Next slide. So, multimodalism, modality, you saw as one of our 5 priorities. Our policy changes within the department, there have been several, from a complete streets policy to active transportation plans that we are creating for each one of our districts. We have 12 different districts or regions within Caltrans, and we're creating an active transportation plan for each one of those districts. Again, it's absolutely key to the changes that we're seeing and that are occurring within the department. Is the focus on becoming more multimodal. Next slide. And part of the reason why we're focusing more on our overall modality, beyond the fact that we know that's a key part to being able to improve our transportation system and give people choices to be able to get about, and choices in goods to be able to get about our state. But a key part of the reason why we're doing it is we also, as a state, unfortunately, struggle with this issue. We have the highest GHG rate coming from the transportation sector than any other state. When you explore the economic sectors and you break down where we're seeing the most climate impacts, it's coming directly from the transportation sector. There are some estimates that even bring this up to nearly 50%. It's at 41% right now. And you can see how much in this particular graphic, you can see how far ahead transportation is when it comes to the negative impacts on the climate of the state. Nationally, this 41% number you see, nationally it's 29%. If you look at EPA data for the country. So you can see that California is particularly challenged with this because our VMT is also higher than any other state in the country as well. Next slide. So a big part of being able to get there is not only creating more modal choices, but addressing the fact that we need to continue to electrify the transportation fleet of the state and the country. Now, there are some challenges that come with this. For example, the fact that as our vehicles have become more fuel efficient and we're electrifying more and more, the revenue that we receive to fund transportation is obviously taking a hit. But I don't think that should deter us from continuing to go here, because I think the benefits of going in this direction far outweigh the challenges that we're seeing when it comes to revenue. We will be able to figure out the revenue part, but we can't continue to go down in a direction that we're going as far as the environmental challenges that the current transportation fleet has been creating for this country, and particularly for our state here in California. So this is a key focus for us. Governor Newsom, my boss, he's been the most aggressive leader that I think in the country, probably in the world on this issue. He's had 2 executive orders, and the one that got the most attention was the fact that in 14 years in California, no light duty vehicle in this state will be made that is of a combustion engine. So we're 13 and a half years away from that point, from being at a point where every car will need to be electric. Next slide. And part of the way to do that, if something is a priority, I always remind people, if something's a priority for you, your resources, your policies, and your actions must align with that. If it's a priority, you claim it's a priority, let's see where the bottom line is. And kudos to the leadership of this state. When it comes to this particular issue, resources are no doubt aligning with this being a priority. There's a lot of information on this graphic, but I want you to hone in on the bottom right corner. That's the total amount that we're planning to spend on continuing to grow the zero emission vehicle market in the state of California over the next 3 years. $2.3 billion. Now we're fortunate in this state that we have we've had a 75, actually almost $80 billion surplus just created in the last year, even though we had a pandemic. $80 billion surplus. And so with that surplus, Governor Newsom has rolled out a comeback plan. That's a $100 billion comeback plan for the state. And that's where we're getting this, part of where we're getting this $2.3 billion from. But the other part that I want you to hone in on, if you look at this particular calendar or this particular FYI, the biggest budget amount is going towards what you see, the CVRP, $525 million over the next 3 years. This program, it's called the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program. This is how the state funds incentives for people buying electric or zero emission vehicles. So that's how much money, if you can just imagine that, is how much we're going to spend over the next 3 years. And you see a $10 million set aside for electric bike incentives as well. So a full all-in investment on becoming creating a cleaner transportation system from California. Next slide. So real quickly, and then we'll love to jump to questions. When it comes to innovation as a priority for us, I like to remind people in our department that California is the innovation capital of the world, I believe. In our backyard are companies like Google, companies like Lyft and Uber and Tesla, Apple, goes on. And we have a culture of that in the state. And state DOTs traditionally are not known to be very innovative. We can kind of become, our work kind of becomes a routine after a while. But we're having a different look at this at Caltrans. We're saying we want people to take calculated risk and reward them, even if something falls short. If they fall short in an effort in taking a calculated risk, they should still be rewarded and applauded for trying. And we're pushing innovation at a different level within the department at Caltrans. Next slide. And part of that obviously is what's happening with connected and autonomous vehicles. I think most states now have people within their department, whether it be at the city level or state level, who are paying a lot of attention to this. We have a whole team at Caltrans who's very connected to our state DMV agency. They're actually leading this, the California Transportation Agency and our DMV, they're leading this effort, but Caltrans is very much at the table and involved because we know how much this is going to play a role in the future of transportation. It may be slightly delayed. I think a lot of us were expecting that by 2022 we would see more adoption here, but it's inevitable, I believe, especially with what's happening with the electrification. Electrification of the fleet. It's very much connected to what's happening in the CAV space as well. And so we will see this in due time. And that increasingly, more vehicles that are in the fleet are automated. They may not be fully autonomous yet, but we see the automation clearly happening to the transportation fleet of the country. Next slide. Efficiencies is something else that we've fully embraced as a priority. Something that sometimes, again, DOTs may struggle with, but we know the stakeholders, the communities we serve in the state, we know what their expectations are of us. We have a very vast budget within the department. Last year was actually over $16 billion. And you know, people hear numbers like that and they say, oh, wow, you guys just got money just all over the place. I don't look at it in that way in any sense, and nor does our leadership. We see, even though with that vast budget, there are vast responsibilities as well. And the expectation is that we deliver and deliver as efficiently as we can. And there are laws in the state that require some of that efficiency. And this may cover it a little bit, but if you could go to the next slide. Oh, doesn't touch on it, but I'll say briefly, there's a SB1 is the last transportation revenue bill that passed in this state, and it requires us to identify $100 million annually in efficiencies or savings. And it's a priority for us. We, over the last couple of years, we've gone beyond $100 million to more than $300 million in efficiencies identified. And finally, when it comes to partnerships, we don't believe we can do our work successfully at Caltrans without engaging, having meaningful engagement with stakeholders and the people of the state. I think we as DOTs can get into a place where we often feel like we know best, we're going to do what we need to do, and we're just going to march forward. But I don't think we can achieve success in that way. Success comes from listening and listening to stakeholders and getting their full input into the big decisions that we're handed to make. We ultimately have to make those decisions, but I think the more engagement we do, the more successful we'll be in delivering for the people of the state. So partnerships is an absolute priority for us. Next slide. So I'll end with this. Oftentimes, I think in this field, we run into roadblocks, and we run into moments where we struggle with being able to move forward with whatever policy issue or funding issue or regulatory issue that we're facing. And some of you may have seen me talk about this in the past, but this is one of the most inspiring quotes that I'll leave you with from somebody that I'll show you here in a second. But it inspires me because it reminds me of how much we need to be diligent and resilient through what I call the good fight and fighting for the right thing for the people we serve. And I'll read very quickly. Nothing is more dramatically apparent than the inadequacy of transportation in our larger urban areas. The solution cannot be found only in the construction of additional urban highways, vital as that job is. Other means for mass transportation, which use less space and equipment, must be improved and expanded. Perhaps even more important, planning for transportation and land use must go hand in hand as two inseparable aspects of the same process. So you read this and you think, well, if somebody said this 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, this is something that sounds very relevant to the issues we face today. But this quote, if you can hit next, the person who made the statement was President Kennedy exactly 60 years ago this summer. And the reason why he was making this statement was because his predecessor, General Eisenhower, had just launched the nation into the building of this immense infrastructure project called the greatest public works project in history. He had just launched us into it. And President Kennedy was saying to Congress and to the nation, look, that job is vital. We need to build, highways. We need to build urban highways. But let's not forget about mass transportation. Let's not forget about the fact that planning for transportation and land use must go hand in hand as two inseparable aspects of the same process. He was reminding us of that. This, and you can see this, 1961. We're having this very same discussions today. Every time I see it, it reminds me of the fact that this fight is not an easy one. And if you're committed to these issues, they're issues that you have to fight for a lifetime. That, 50, 60 years ago, this was being said, and we're still fighting for this. We gain progress every day, but we can't let up. We can't let up in our efforts to make sure that we create the true bright future that we want for the people that we serve through a better transportation system. So with that, thank you again, ITE, for the opportunity. I know I probably rushed through that quite a bit, but I really want to hear from people who are listening in the audience. Would love to take some questions about any of the information I just shared or any topics related to our industry at all. So thank you.
Toks, thank you so much for your presentation. It's so amazing to hear about this ambitious revolution that's occurring in Caltrans and all the different things that are happening. I guess my first question is related to your President Kennedy quote. How does Caltrans influence land use decisions? What's your involvement in shaping that direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a tough question, but we know that we do. We don't have a formal role like most states. Of the 50 states, maybe 2 or 3 states are there where at the state government level, there is direct influence over land use decisions. I think we all know that land use is controlled, whether it be land use plans or zoning. It's all handled at the local level, not at the state level. But we know we play a role there. We know we can have an impact. So, for example, if we're building, if we're supporting the building of a new transit center or a new high-speed rail or a transit facility, we can, if we're funding that and we have funds in it, we can say, look, we want to make sure that this has a TOD element, a transit-oriented development element, or mixed-use element to ensure that, again, people don't have to travel long distances. California has more what are known as super commuters than any other state. Super commuters meaning they're driving an hour and 30 minutes, at least an hour and 30 minutes, one direction for commuting. So, 3 hours a day possibly being spent in traffic. California has more than anybody else. So we've got to reduce that. We've got to change that. And the way to influence that is to make sure that, again, there's more affordable housing near transportation options. So we don't have a direct role there, but an indirect role in our policies and our decision-making within the department.
It certainly speaks to one of your objectives with partnerships and making sure that you're having that collaboration with the local agencies. And I've been complaining about my 20-minute commute. I can't imagine a 90-minute commute. I do want to remind the audience, if you would like to submit a question, you can visit slido.com and enter our code J127. You'll see that in the chat pod as well, just as a reminder. You can also upvote questions. So if you see one that you really like and want to make sure it gets asked, you can click the thumbs up button next to the question. So we have a lot coming in through the Slido. So the first one that is at the very top says, how are the wide range of natural disasters that California continually faces influencing your thinking about climate action and transportation?
Yeah, very much so. Very much the case. It's directly influencing it. I mentioned the fact that 4 million acres of land burned in the state in 2020, the worst wildfire season in the history of the state, larger than the size of the state of Delaware and Vermont. If you're looking for a comparison, larger than 2 states combined. That's how much land burned here. Not only that, sea levels are rising in the state. We have several facilities because we're a coastal state that there's one big highway that washed away that made a lot of national news recently, but we also have more highways that are being endangered by sea level rise. So our multimodal decisions, some of the decisions we're making are directly because of that. I think a lot of people, and there's a lot of excitement, rightfully, to see how we can electrify the fleet of the state, but that can't be where all the energy is. I mean, that's great, and I think it's a tremendous thing that California is leading the way on that. But it's those multimodal decisions. The more we can diversify how people and goods move, I think the more we'll be able to reduce the emissions, that 41% number that you saw. So very much connected to it. I was remiss, I didn't mention the fact that last year we set aside $100 million from Caltrans. We proposed from our maintenance budget $100 million to our commission, our board, to set aside for active transportation. Our commission accepted that, they adopted it. So not only that $100 million last year, this year, Governor Newsom, in his budget, in this comeback plan for California, has put in $500 million for active transportation. For comparison's sakes, the national budget for the TAP program, the Transportation Alternatives Program, is a $900 million program for the country. And we're putting aside $500 million. So very much we see the leadership of the state sees the connection between our modal choices and the climate challenges we're facing as well.
Yeah, that's an amazing number. I know I've been in meetings where the local agencies here are arguing over less than $1 million of shared funding across our entire community in TAP. So that's amazing. And it leads into one of the questions that's come up in the chat. It says, do you see a conflict between this commitment to modality and this amazing funding amount of transit, pedestrians, and cyclists, but also supporting connected and autonomous vehicles?
No, I don't. I don't. And let me be clear about something before I even answer that question directly. I mentioned this shift, and I described this paradigm shift that we're going through to understand, to focus on these 3 principles more. I think some people, when they hear us as a team, or me, they hear me talk about this, they think that we're somehow saying that delivering on transportation projects are no longer a priority. And it makes a lot of people nervous. They're like, what do you mean equity and climate change is your focus? And I have to remind people, no, our number 1 task still is to deliver. We have a robust program that we're responsible for delivery. So we're still focused on project delivery, but we're focused on it with those intended outcomes, trying to make sure we achieve great successes with those intended outcomes. So directly to this question, there are obviously some potential conflicts we need to keep in mind and be aware of. The fact that as this CAV space, as the connected and autonomous vehicle space is growing, we need to make sure that there's a lot of consideration being given to active transportation, particularly transit. I think will be fine, but to the most vulnerable users of our system, we need to make sure that the growth is not happening and jeopardizing people who may be walking or biking. And I'm the chair of the Council on Active Transportation at AASHTO. This is one of the things that I emphasize quite a bit, to make sure that it's great that the industry is going here, but we need to keep the pressure on the industry to make sure that they're keeping vulnerable users of the transportation system in mind. So I think both can grow in parallel without there being a lot of conflict if we're paying good attention to it. And
you mentioned this this transition from specifically just delivering projects, or that perception, to this delivery of outcomes. And obviously that's kind of a big culture change, not just for your residents and the recipients of the projects, but also for your 21,000 staff members. Can you talk about how you're making this culture shift for them?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. I have meetings every day. I had another one yesterday where it was getting an update from staff about our equity efforts. And you could listen to the team that's leading the department, and they're like, look, you need to understand we run into roadblocks on this. There are people who don't agree with this direction. And, I go into it understanding that and knowing that we're not a monolithic group. Not everybody is going to be like, oh yeah, this is amazing, let's keep going. That some people are going to be like, what in the world are you talking about? And there are people here that are like that, who say on the team of, more than 21,000, like, why does he keep talking about this stuff over and over again? So it's incumbent upon us as the leaders of the department, and myself as well, to make sure that we're translating. I mean, we hear this all the time. We're translating the why. Like, why are we talking about this? And, these are not red and blue or purple issues. I mean, we can see with our very own eyes what's happening in our world when it comes to the impacts on our state, when it comes to environmental issues, climate issues. You can see communities that we've gutted with highways, and how prior they were these vibrant places. We built these structures through them, and it helped many, but it hurt them. And we need to approach doing work in those communities in a different way. So we've got to break down the why more. And we have to tie performance measures, and this is the hard part. This is the part where people struggle with. But staff, your job plan, depending on where you are in the organization, it becomes more and more tied to these priorities and to these expected outcomes. So it's not easy. Change is not easy. I mean, it's difficult to go through, but I think ultimately it's not for people like me or other leaders in the department. It's for the people of California. And I'll encourage anybody in any other state to think about it that way as well. The intended outcome is a greater life for the people that you serve.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the employees are residents of California too, so they're doing it for themselves. Mm-hmm. Speaking of positions, one of the questions in the chat is, can you talk more about your focus on safety and the new Chief Safety Officer position you created? What are your goals for this position, and how's it working out?
Yeah, very, very good question. It's one of the most important steps that I believe we've taken as a department. Is when I came on board in 2019, some of my predecessors had been already working on the idea of creating this position. And in 2020, it was probably one of the first hiring decisions I made. Early 2020 was to hire a Chief Safety Officer. Rachel Carpenter had been working in the department prior, and she's a PE and very passionate about issues around this. The challenging part for us is that this work requires a lot of groundwork. As it relates to making a shift in safety. And the shift that we're making in safety, I didn't go into detail about it, but we're shifting to a safe systems approach when it comes to safety as a department. And it requires a lot of planning and policies changing that I think we have to make before we see the results out in communities and on our streets, in our neighborhoods. That part's a little, frustrating sometimes, the fact that you have to go through all these design policy changes and having a different approach, because last year we almost got up to 3,800 people in our state dying on the transportation system. For the nation, we are over 40,000. And so, if you're leading an entity, you're thinking, what in the world are we doing, dancing around with policy shifts and all this kind of stuff? Like, what do we need to do, like, right now? Like, this is urgent. We got to do something immediately. to start to save lives. We lost five cyclists in a span of 1 month in the San Diego area this year. This week, we lost a contractor working on a Caltrans project, a non-Caltrans employee, but nevertheless working on a Caltrans project. So, I mean, when you hear those statistics and those numbers, you're like, look, you know, all this stuff, like, how can we do something like more immediately? But I know the groundwork needs to happen, and much kudos to Rachel and Monica and several people, Corey Bench on our maintenance and safety team, who are helping us make the shifts to that safe systems approach at Caltrans.
Yeah, it's a process, right? So unfortunately, we can't always act as quickly as we want. Mm-hmm. Some of this is related to the automobile and people's choices of what modes to take, and there's certain preferences among the public, or at least the way things have always been, right? And so there's a question in the chat that says, how do we as professionals convince ourselves, and I'm guilty of this too, and the public, that the automobile is not what we need in urban centers, or at a minimum there are lots of options and you can choose to mix it up sometimes?
Yeah, so, you know, I don't think we can fully get there. Back to the President Kennedy quote. I don't think we can fully get there if we just continue to focus on building the facilities. I think we've done a really good job nationally. Well, a fairly good job. I wouldn't say a really good job. We've done a better job recently as a nation and some states in building more infrastructure to support these modal choices, to create some mode shift. But ultimately, part of what makes it happen is the fact that you have to live in a place that supports that. You know, the more sort of rural setting you have, you know, the more challenged you are with being able to have, you know, multiple choices to be able to get places. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that multimodal doesn't work in rural areas. It definitely does. But the more sort of spread out and sprawled we are, the more challenging it becomes. So it's one thing to build a facility, but I think our industry has to pay more and more attention to the Kennedy quote, the Kennedy message of making sure that we're building our communities in a way that supports modal choices as well. When I moved to California, I lived a mile away from the office. And for the first year that I lived here, I either biked or walked to work every single day. Now, family moved and we moved a little bit further out. Biking and walking was no longer an option, but I took the train instead. I intentionally moved to an area that had the light rail connected to it. And sometimes I would bring my bike on a light rail. Now, I don't do it every day, like I walked and biked every day. So it's that where you live, connected to where you play, worship, and friend's house, all those key commute trips we make, they have to be along areas where we can have those modal choices. And we need to make decisions that align with that more and more.
And kind of along those lines, California has taken the lead in land development reviews and traffic impact studies at looking at VMT versus vehicular level of service, particularly with Senate Bill 743. Being that leader, have you had any other states reach out to you and start to follow your lead?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. I'm not going to go through naming states, but yeah, states are definitely interested in the steps that California has taken. If you're not familiar with SB 743, it essentially moves California, and this is an 8-year-old law, by the way, 8-year-old bill, moves California from focusing on making transportation decisions, investment decisions based on LOS, which has been the industry standard for dozens of years, from moving from LOS to VMT, understanding what the VMT impact is going to be from that transportation decision. And the same thing on land use, saying that as a development is coming in, how is it going to impact VMT? Is it going to make people drive more? Is it going to be around modal choices? All those things. So both land use and transportation. It's not easy, I'll tell you, in implementing this 8-year-old law. We're still working on implementation related to this because California is also unique. We have 25 what are called self-help counties, self-help organizations that generate their own transportation revenue to the tune of billions of dollars a year. And a lot of those revenue packages that have been created, those revenue measures, are related to expanding the transportation network, not necessarily through transit or walking or biking, but sometimes it's add more lanes. So you've got entities who their entire, funding measure, their funding proposals are based on how do you widen the transportation network and add more capacity through widening. And you have a state law, on the other hand, that says, look, we need to reduce VMT. We need to have a transportation system that's not encouraging VMT and encouraging sprawl. So a bit of a divergence there when it comes to us as one of the implementers of that law and what's happening at the local level as well. So it's not perfect, is the point I'm making, but we're trying our best to implement that.
Yeah, that's certainly a challenge, and probably lots of places. I know we're dealing with that in Nevada, where we'd love to expand the transit system, but all of our transportation funding laws are written that it has to be applied to highways. So we're all in this kind of similar boat. You mentioned during your presentation about innovation and calculated risk. Are there some exciting things happening in Caltrans that you would be willing to share, some innovations and maybe some technology changes that are happening?
Oh, wow, you're totally catching me off guard with this one. There have been a couple of things that that come to mind. I mean, there was one particular paving project that we did in the state last year that was we used 100% recycling material to plastic bottles to pave a section of a roadway. We saw a few challenges related to that paving project right here in Northern California, but I think the idea and the point is we want to have a department that's not all about just going through the routine process to do everything, and we want to encourage people to take shots. And when I say take shots and try, it's not about the multi-million-dollar innovation, creating some brand new device or tool, but just in basic processes within the department. Sometimes it's going to be this big new shiny thing, and sometimes it's just going to be a simple process within the department that we routinely just go through, all this bureaucracy and red tape for. But I mean, we find a way to do it in 2 or 3 steps, and we're like, that's innovative. We're still getting the outcome that we want. So that's the message to the team and to the staff. It's not telling you to go create some brand new tool or device or some new method of recycling or paving a road, but to be open to a more creative process to delivering solutions.
Yeah, I think sometimes people hear innovative and they think big, expensive technology-based projects, and it can be, like you said, as simple as changing a policy to be more efficient. So that's great. Speaking of some change and dealing with some uncertainty, we've been in the pandemic for 14 months or so, year and a half. Can you describe a little bit of how that's affected your department and maybe some of the impacts on your employees and how you've overcome that?
Yeah, if somebody told me in 2019 that, when I was coming in that this was going to be the future, that you get 6 months and then a global pandemic would hit, I probably would say, nah, I'll pass. No, it's been challenging. There's no doubt. For me, for moving to a new state, but even beyond that, our team, because of the expectations put on them, it's been challenging as well. But I mentioned those 5 priorities early on, and the fact that we were able to coalesce around them. And I think it helped us get through those the stormy months. I really believe that because the adjustments we had to make. For example, we had to order 5,000 laptops at one point, and we had to get 13,000 people that were eligible to work remotely, 13,000 people into remote settings to work. I mean, you can imagine, and we had to do it within a span of 2 weeks because we just couldn't we can absolutely just shut down the work. And when you think about productivity, as far as the bigger projects we had to deliver, like 95% of the work that we were intending to deliver, as far as projects, whether it be bridge work or paving jobs, things like that, we did. None of that, very little of that got derailed. So the resilience of the team is just unbelievable. They're to be highly commended for that. There are places that I wish, we could have done more, and I believe we fell short just because of the nature of what we were facing. But I like engagement quite a bit, probably more than most people do. But I want to hear from people. I think it's the planning background that I have is like, you want to sit down with people and say, okay, what do you think, or how do you feel we should approach this? And in that environment, it's just hard to do. I mean, not everybody's going to have broadband and a computer and be able to sign on to a meeting. So it affected us in those kind of ways as far as our engagement with communities. But everywhere else, I think, to be honest with you, I really think we got stronger because we had to be resilient.
Yeah, it feels so overwhelming sometimes. It's great to hear that your 5 priorities kind of served as a beacon, and as guided your efforts. Speaking of outreach and listening to stakeholders and employees, and there's a question that says, do you see transportation leading the journey to equity? What are the impacts on housing affordability? And is Caltrans working with other state agencies on equity?
Yeah, the first part of the question was, do I see transportation? Say that again.
Do you see transportation leading the journey to equity?
Yeah, I like that question a lot. Transportation and equity, as we all know, have been long intertwined. There's a long history between where we are, almost a metaphorical history between where we are as a country and transportation. Going back all the way to how the nation got founded, and it was through people journeying from Europe and some people being forced to journey from Africa. So transportation long been tied in, and even to recent years, the 50s and 60s, the fact that whether it be Dr. King, Martin Luther King, and the bus boycotts, Rosa Parks and her efforts as well on busing. I mean, you can go back all the way through history and kind of you see a connection and how transportation is sort of woven to the equity challenges we face as a nation. I think so. I think to that part of the question, I think the more we do here to provide true opportunity for people, access for people, choices for people, regardless of their income level, regardless of their demographic, and even pull up the ones that we've left behind. I think we'll make significant impacts in the equity space. I like to tell people all the time, we say, rising tides lift all boats. But we have to keep in mind that some people's sails and their boats have been taken away. Some people have holes in their boats. And so their boats can't rise, their boats can't move. So we have to go back there and make sure that we fix those sails, that we plug those holes, that we fix the damages to those boats. So as the tides rise, they can rise as well. So there's very much a connection between the work that we're doing in transportation and the successes that we'll see nationally in equity. That's one of the unfortunate but great things that came out of the reckoning that we experienced last summer.
So as you're following this timeline of history and the parallels of transportation and the changes in our country, what's giving you hope in these current times?
What's given me hope is the fact that we are coming together. At some points, it may not feel like it, but I really believe we are. And you think about the deal that was made yesterday. It's only one small deal. We're not at the end of the line for that yet. And I hate talking about politics, especially in a setting like this. But I think the Senate needed 60 votes, and they may have gotten 67. I think there were 16 or 17 Republicans that voted for the bill yesterday. And I'm going to leave the politics out of it right there. But it shows that we're, as we see these moments and opportunities to get to that next level, we're coming around and say, all right, leave my, party affiliation and all that stuff behind. We got issues we need to address. You got countries like China that are investing trillions, and we're still messing around in the billions. And, you can go state by state by state who bridge conditions are not up to par, or just their highway infrastructure is not up to par. So there's no doubt that as we come together, we can achieve even more than we previously imagined. And that's given me a ton of hope. I'm talking about infrastructure, but just think about the equity conversations that we're all having. Even though it's challenging, we're coming together and saying, oh, wow, we did that in transportation? That's not right. As shiny as that may look, as much access as that may have provided for freight or for cars, what about the people who lived there? And as we embrace that outlook, I think more and more it's changing how we deliver on these outcomes, and it's given me a ton of hope.
Me too. It's an exciting time to be in transportation. So we have time for one more question, and since this is an ITE conference, I'm going to ask an ITE question. From one of our audience members, it says, how can ITE support leaders like you in creating safer, greener, and more equitable cities?
To be that voice for us. It's an easy question, but a challenging one to actually deliver on. It's an easy question to ask, but to actually deliver on it and be impactful with it is not easy. But I believe in the voice of organizations like ITE and AASHTO and NACTO and the influence that you carry, that you have. And finding those right opportunities to speak up for the states that are doing this work, or the cities that are doing this work, and saying to whether it be a committee at Congress, TNI or EPW, or to the White House, or whomever it may be, for ITE to say, look, here are the states and cities that are doing this, and we know it's going to make a great difference for people. And I'll be remiss if I didn't say much kudos to ITE for the work that you've been doing, Alyssa and Jeff. I've only been in this space for about 20 years in the transportation space, but I've seen ITE transform for very eyes in the recent years, to shifting from just focusing on just hardcore engineering issues to talking about issues like health and sustainability and creating committees around it and livability. It's pretty impressive. And as you see entities like ours doing this work, trumpeting that work in the right platforms, whether it be social media, political offices, wherever it may be, I think is always very helpful and gives us a little bit of a win in our backs.
Well, thank you so much, Toks. You know, we're happy to be the platform where you can share information, and I know everybody has really appreciated your presentation on how Caltrans is evolving and the great work that you're doing with your agency, and I know there's lots of takeaways with that. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for the invitation. Really appreciate you inviting Caltrans to be, again, a part of this year's annual meeting. Thank you.